Hello YouTube. Very few people in the world realize the great amount of paranormal phenomena that exist in Central Asia. And today I want to tell you about Uzbekistan, some of the most unusual cases, some of the most interesting research that seriously very few people know about it in the world. I've been to Brazil, China, I've spoken to a number of people and they were amazed to find out even a little bit about the great UFO scene, so to say, in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other countries of Central Asia. So let's get right to it. Uzbekistan is a land of great historic heritage and ancient culture. I want to give you a little bit of the background before we go right into the cases. I think you'll find it interesting. It's located in the very heart of Central Asia, and ever since the ancient times it has been at the crossroads stretching from the Orient to West. Now, Uzbekistan is well known for its ancient oasis settlements and towns along the famous Great Silk Road. But there are countless treasures of antiquity lying under the deserts, actually like silent witnesses to the passing armies of Alexander the Great and other conquerors. Those treasures are basically buried in the hot sands, mountains, and the barren soil of this country, and very few of them have been unearthed. And of course, the Uzbeki deserts contain paranormal mysteries. In the 1930s, Soviet archaeologists found cities lost long ago under the desert sands of Uzbekistan. There were literally hundreds of ancient sites, some fortified and preserved for ages by dry and merciless sun. And because of this preservation, actually, like in ancient Egypt, archaeologists are able to find a lot of interesting things, but they're not the only ones that look. The Red Sand Desert, or the KYZYL-KUM Desert, is located in Central Asia, between the rivers Amu Darya and Sir Darya, in the region historically known as Transoxania or Sogdiana, and is divided between Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. 95 million years ago, dinosaurs roamed there. The KYZYL-KUM Desert, it surrounds Khwarezm Oasis. It's a very unusual and strange place. And the sands and rocks there, they hide signs of human activities from ages before. Signs of ancient, long-gone civilizations, people of antiquity, forgotten people that might have witnessed visitors from the outer space. Now all there is are dead canals that extend for kilometers, ruins of settlements, fortresses and towns, inhabited by lizards and snakes. If you ever have a chance to travel to Uzbekistan, I think you will fall in love with all this antiquity and the discoveries that are made, and just the whole country and the incredible monuments you can see there. As for the deserts, they have attracted identified flying objects, and some quite very unusual inhabitants of such crafts. Like ancient Egypt, this somewhat small territory contains numerous monuments of ancient architecture, and still the desert is not completely explored. But those who do, on occasions find incredible ancient rock carvings, such as the ones that were found in central KYZYL-KUM, rock carvings of beings in spacesuits and spaceships. And we need to go to Zarafshan. Zarafshan is a city in the center of Uzbekistan Navoiy region. It's located in the KYZYL-KUM desert, and it's called the gold capital of Uzbekistan. The outlying areas of the city have been visited by UFOs frequently, and sometimes in large numbers, definitely since mid-1980s. As the years passed, there have been more UFO visits and also reports of contacts between the locals and aliens. The aliens have been described typically as small in size, covered with scales, with big eyes and without ears. Those who had studied the phenomenon in Uzbekistan believed that the aliens are attracted to Zarafshan by gold and uranium found in the deserts. Back in October of 2002, Fate magazine published my article titled Ancient Astronauts of Central Asia. Among other things, I described there an expedition of the Uzbek ufologists to the mountains of KYZYL-KUM to find signs of ancient astronauts, those who supposedly visited Earth thousands of years ago and were observed by local inhabitants. The expedition in 1991 was led by Sergei Azadov, director of the Tashkent Ufology Center, or in abbreviated Russian UFO Center. Sergei Azadov passed away in 2008 in Germany, where he moved some years before his death. He was a person of many talents. He was a geologist, writer, journalist, and a movie producer. And by the way, one of his films was submitted to Cannes Festival in 1993. While I collected information about the expedition itself, it's only recently that I found out what happened before the expedition. I think the story is fascinating. Sergei Azadov visited the offices of the Soviet Uzbek Telegraph Agency. It was in 1990, but the journalist he met with mistakenly dated the meeting to 1986 in his recent writings. Azadov told that reporter, whose name is Mikhail Gar, about himself and his work. Azadov described the extent of the UFO visits to Uzbekistan and then revealed that an alien ship crashed in the desert 30 kilometers from Zarafshan, not that long before the meeting, just a few days before, according to Gar. The UFO researcher brought two strange fragments with him, small fragments that resembled melted glass. This was sand recovered from the crash site. According to Azadov, the fragments possessed ability to heal headaches, and it was achieved by just placing them to the temples. He gave the fragments to Gar, the Soviet Uzbek journalist. Azadov also presented a detailed printed report about the incident to the journalist. Very soon, Mikhail Gar had an opportunity to fly to Zarafshan with an assignment that he had to do at the Central Radio Department. At the airport of Zarafshan, he was met by the local head of the safety for the department, whose name was Vasily Paverinov. Later, Paverinov talked to Gar, and he told him that UFOs are frequent visitors to the area. Thousands of people have observed them over the quarry, over local open area cinema, and just over the city. There were cases of abduction by aliens and subsequent return of people. Such cases were closely studied. Experts from the Soviet Ministry of Defense came to the city for that purpose, because Zarafshan was, after all, a strategic city in Soviet terminology, because of all the mining and the precious metals found in the desert. The subjects of abduction were tested, and their tales were recorded. Paverinov had copies of the cassettes and offered Gar to listen to them. Then he brought out a large plate of baked quartz and said that this fragment was recovered from the site of the crashed ship. Actually, Paverinov clarified that they, so-called, biological robots, biological robots, destroyed the spaceship and themselves with it by burning it. Paverinov explained about the source of the information. I will not go into this here. Those who want to know more know how to contact me. The case was investigated, and the city authorities and the KGB were in charge of the investigation, just as they were with other visits to the city. In the morning, the journalist and the head of the Central Radio Department took a helicopter. It was flown by Paverinov, and they flew to the site. They made a few circles over the gigantic quarry, open pit gold mining. Then they flew to the KYZYL-KUM desert over hills. Paverinov pointed to the spot where the alleged crash or self-destruction of the alien spaceship took place. Below them, on the sandy surface, there were two black circles with clear outlines. One large, about 6 meters in diameter, the other smaller. They were perfectly shaped. Gar was not really impressed, because he expected to see more. The helicopter circled over the site of the disaster for some time, and then they returned back to Zarafshan. Paverinov drove the reporter to his country home in the company vehicle, and they talked. Once they got to the dacha, or the country home in Russian, he took out the tape recorder and placed next to a pile of cassettes. Paverinov told Gar that these are recordings of all those who had close contact with the extraterrestrials. And Paverinov continued, "But if you feel sudden fear while listening, do not pay attention to it. There is no threat. As for me, it seems to me that someone digs around in my head, as they would in a file drawer," when he listens to the tapes. And he added, "Food and drinks are in the refrigerator. I'll be back in 2 hours." Gar listened to the stories of people who encountered the unknown. There were similarities in their accounts. The aliens met them somewhere. The aliens looked such and such. The aliens took them aboard their ship and warned that there will soon be natural and technological disasters ever more frequently. But what attracted Gar's attention was the repeated information. There are faults at the Earth core that emit energy containing traits unknown to humans. This energy is necessary to refill their spaceships. Zarafshan and the surrounding area are like an energy base, attracting attention of the intergalactic transportation. Gar wrote an article about the findings that he saw and what he heard. It was published in the Russian magazine Anomalia. At that time, it was produced jointly by the TASS news agency and the association Ekologia Nepoznanova, or the Ecology of the Unknown. Sergei Azadov was invited to be a speaker in Japan at a UFO conference as a consequence of the publication. The reporter mentioned that there are thousands of rock drawings in the central KYZYL-KUM. They date generally to approximately 2000 years BC. According to geologists who had worked in Bukantau area, some of the petroglyphs resemble flying craft and humanoid beings in spacesuits. By the way, Bukantau contains rare metal and gold-silver deposits. This information prompted this association, Ekologia Nepoznanova, to organize the 1991 expedition to search for the possible remnants or footprints of ancient ET contact. Testimonies of visitation to the Uzbekistan territory by representatives of extraterrestrial civilizations. That expedition consisted of scientists, journalists, and ufologists. 4 years after the expedition, I think slightly less actually than 4 years, I received interesting information from the Soviet ufologists that I knew, including the news of the expedition in search for traces or signs of ancient aliens in Central Asia. I described the findings and activities of the expedition in the October 2002 Fate magazine. I think you will like it, because I'll get into it. As time went by, Mikhail Gar, the reporter of the Uzbek news agency, became busy with other projects and concerns, and the story was lost in the background. But something unusual did occur. The fragments of the Zarafshan disaster that Azadov gave him had disappeared from the bookshelf, where the reporter kept his collection of mineral rocks. His family never touched those fragments. They just vanished. Gar was quite sorry about it because those fragments did cure his headaches. Vasily Paverinov perished in 2006 in a helicopter crash, along with 2 other people on board. They were on a job-related mission. He was a highly respected expert in his field, an engineer who had worked for 39 years in KYZYL-KUM, and he was a decent person, well liked in the city. I heard that he was also actively assisting National Geographic in their program about the Great Silk Road in 1990. And years before, he was in trouble with the local KGB. because he organized unauthorized club where people could hear songs of the beloved Vladimir Vysotsky, the Russian songwriter and performer, who was somewhat tolerated by the government, whose songs were mostly heard underground, so to say. So, from what I understand, Paverinov was actually a friend of Vysotsky. But that's outside of our presentation today. Again, those serious researchers of ufology who are interested in this case and want more details should contact me. Meanwhile, I found a brief account of an Uzbek woman that participated in the expeditions with Azadov. She was an expert rock climber and guide. She was also low flying in the Paverinov's helicopter over the disaster area in the Red Desert. Another Uzbek woman mentioned that her friend, a businessman, not prone to mysticism, while with his workers at the Nuratau quarry, observed more than once unusual, radiant, unidentified objects in the sky above. And now here is my abbreviated account of the 1991 expedition. Please know that if anyone is interested in the actual photos of the expedition, the photographer passed away in 2005, but I know the contact information for his wife. Sergei Azadov was a noted Soviet and Uzbek researcher who was quite famous some years ago among those who studied the paranormal in the USSR. Azadov had been known as a regional expert. He was a VP of the Ecology of the Unknown organization. This organization provided funds for the expedition as well as support. My letters to Azadov were never answered, and I heard from other researchers that his whereabouts are unknown. I wrote this back in 2002. Yet the expedition's discoveries in the KYZYL-KUM desert deserve our attention. Most of my information about the expedition comes from Sergei Azadov's article published in 1992 in Anomalia magazine in Russia, and also the information received by the Russian Ufology Research Center and myself in the mid-1990s from Russian UFO researchers who knew Azadov and his work. The expedition was actually called the third expedition of the Tashkent UFO Center and was to find the evidence of what we in the West call the ancient astronaut hypothesis or paleocontact in Russian. In turn, this evidence was needed to prove that alien civilizations have been interested in the Zarafshan tectonic fault as a source of the free quantum mechanical energy for their ships. The final decision to organize this expedition was made after the UFO Center researchers conducted interviews with geologists who had worked in the Bukhantau Mountains. They revealed that inside some places of the ridge in the center of the KYZYL-KUM desert, there are large collections of the petroglyphs. It was an interdisciplinary expedition. The preparations for this expedition lasted over half a year. The UFO Center researchers had thoroughly read and studied all of the Academy of Sciences of Uzbekistan archaeological literature about the region. They sought advice from geologists and archaeologists and laid out their itinerary. An almost new military all-terrain vehicle ZIL-157 was rented too. They called it the Monster. The only problem was procurement of sufficient food. At that time, the economy was crumbled in the Soviet Union. The country was in shambles, and in Uzbekistan, they used a rationing system to distribute food. The expedition consisted of 10 people. Among its members were scientists, an astronomer, a physicist, and a geologist, researchers of the paranormal, a journalist affiliated with the Russian Information Agency, a driver, and an auto mechanic. And Sergei Azadov was the head of the expedition. Their monster trekked through the sands of the KYZYL-KUM desert, a very difficult place to travel, but beautiful and unique. Vasily Paverinov, a colleague of Sergei Azadov and a seasoned researcher of the paranormal, met them in Zarafshan. He was able to find uh, Mi-2 or Mi-2 helicopter for the expedition to deliver food and water to their camp. That desert contains several mountainous massifs. One of them, Bukantau, is located in the center of the KYZYL-KUM hinterland. The mountains are old, dried out by heat and winds. Their height is not more than 800 meters over sea level. Archaeologists estimate that the ancient petroglyphs of the Bukantau were made some 4,000 years ago. Also, the Uchkuduk geologists reported that in the spurs of the Bukantau massif known as Altintau, there are large collections of the rock paintings, carvings, but the archaeologists did not study them as yet. The first stopping place of the expedition was near the Jilanda well, about 10 kilometers east of the town of Uchkuduk. Sergei Asadov did not mention it in his report, or he might not have known, but there is a uranium mine in the area. There's always also extensive gold mining in the area. In my research of the Russian UFO phenomenon, I have noticed a wealth of reports of UFO sightings over the Tian Shan Mountains and other areas of gold and uranium concentrates. The Kokpatas mine is not far from Uchkuduk. That August heat was merciless, and the granite rocks of the Altintau were very scorching. But that mattered little to the researchers. They finally saw the petroglyphs. Photographs were taken, drawings made to be shared with archaeologists later, and they did. And that quite led to some, future expeditions, scientific expeditions, but of archaeologists. Most petroglyphs depicted camels. One petroglyph was very distinct, very different from the rest. It resembled a flying machine. Besides the petroglyphs, the expedition discovered traces of ancient mining of turquoise. Another extensive research was undertaken to the north, in the area of the Pakhali well and spring. There were giant stone monoliths around the camp area. The waters of the spring were cool. People have dwelt in the area for thousands of years. And the expedition discovered Bronze Age petroglyphs all around them in the rocks. The Middle Ages were represented by Arabic letters. Russian soldiers, under the command of the Grand Prince Nikolai Romanov, left their marks also as they trekked through the desert and rested in the Bakhali well area in 1873. But modern graffiti, unlike the medieval and 19th century carvings, truly deface some ancient petroglyphs, forever destroying historical record of ancient and forgotten people. The petroglyphs depicted camels and various human shapes. Male figures were depicted as a rule to the right and female to the left of the observer. The Khwarezm Archaeological Expedition of 1972 concluded that the petroglyphs at the Bakhali well were carved into rocks around 2000 years BC. Some petroglyphs could have been dated even earlier. Most, however, are approximately from 1000 years BC. When Vasily Poverinov flew in on his helicopter to visit the expedition, he brought along experienced geologists of the KYZYL-KUM. They gave valuable advice to researchers. After 1 week of extensive research in the nearby rocks, several curious petroglyphs were discovered. One of them resembled a modern rocket. The other petroglyph was discovered at the basalt plate, at the height of 40 meters from the base of the rock. The object, depicted by a forgotten ancient painter, resembled a winged apparatus, stabilizers, and 4 apertures in the rear section, something like thrusts. 2 elliptical elongated bodies were carved below it. The bodies were moving from right to left. The trains behind each one looked like flames and gas. The petroglyph was very well carved into the rock and quite distinct. Yet another petroglyph depicted 2 camels coming toward each other, and in the middle a strange structure with a spherical stop and 4 legs or supports. That is how modern observers describe UFOs that have landed. I'm sure you've read such reports from other countries. The expedition trekked towards the Arkar Well and the Chilisai Ravine, toward the southeast direction from Bahali Well. There they found few petroglyphs, mostly depicting camels and some other representatives of the animal world. But there were also some mysterious depictions of signs, also called tamga. The term tamga, originally referring to the seal of a given group, was later borrowed by Russians to designate custom levies in Russian tamozhnya. The tamga was embroidered on Central Asian tents, into rugs, jewelry, and so forth. The researchers also discovered very curious petroglyphs at the Arkar Well. One of them depicted a cigar-shaped object containing some animal inside. Four thin rays extended from the top part of the cigar toward the animal inside. Another petroglyph depicted an object that strongly resembled a modern military aircraft. Yet another rock painting seemingly contained something like a geographic map. Not far away from the Arkar Well, the researchers found signs of ancient metallurgic activities. They discovered a corroded metallic alloy on the bottom of the melting furnace. But a petroglyph they found next to the furnace was also of great interest to them. It depicted a spherical structure with a flat bottom as it stood on four supports. Inside the sphere was an anthropomorphous being with spread out legs and arms. The expedition estimated that the petroglyph there was as old as those in the Bahali area. After the expedition left the area of the Arkar Well, they trekked toward Zarafshan. Vasily Paverinov revealed to them that a unique monument to ancient art was discovered in the area, and as yet archaeologists had not studied it. 1 kilometer to the east of the city of Zarafshan, on a huge horizontal plate of greenish-gray color, they saw dozens of well-preserved petroglyphs. Most of them look like other petroglyphs discovered by the expedition in the Central Asia. One petroglyph actually depicted a classical flying saucer with 5 supports, and yet another, right next to it, showed a structure on 4 supports, but with a more complicated top construction. It is important to mention here that a high Soviet military official involved in the secret governmental program to study anomalous phenomena, the Setka, which I mentioned before, revealed in an interview to Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper on May 30, 2002, that Zarafshan was one of the areas of high anomalous activities. That what it means is that in the annals of the secret program, they studied areas all over the Soviet Union, and Zarafshan was of great interest to them, one of the key areas. Plaksin, a colonel and top researcher in the Ministry of Defense in the modern-day Russian army, considered the time in 2002, told the newspaper that during the years of the secret program while in force, it was 78 to 1991, he and his colleagues had determined several such areas of anomalous activities in the USSR, zones of great importance to Soviet military UFO researchers. Back to the expedition. Their final destination was the Sarmish Gorge, located near the town of Navoi. The rocks there were higher and more inaccessible than any other areas the expedition had visited. The main problem encountered by researchers was the presence nearby of a young pioneer camp. Hundreds of trips were undertaken by Soviet kids to the site, and they left marks, spots, and traces all over the petroglyphs. But yet there were areas that the children could not reach, in the upper area of the gorge. And there the petroglyphs remained in relatively good shape. Researchers of the expedition discovered that the petroglyphs were grouped into galleries, and very few petroglyphs were carved away from such clusters. Also, few camels were depicted in the Sarmish petroglyphs. Mostly depicted were such animals as bulls, horses, goats, and of course humans. One carving was of particular interest to the expedition. It portrayed a humanoid being with a dome-shaped head, a short and powerful body, long arms, and chubby short legs. The being had simian features. Azadov was reminded of a snowman, the legendary humanoid creature, and he wondered if such creatures actually dwelt in the Bronze Age and perhaps even survived to be our contemporaries. Another curious drawing was discovered on one of the flat plains. It showed a technological structure shaped as a drop turned upside down. Two semi-spherical shapes support the narrow end of the object. That so-called drop is divided into two halves by a horizontal line. In the upper part there is a figure of a man. Several rays are emitted by the structure into different directions. Strange creatures are standing next to the structure and can be seen below it. And at a higher altitude along the left side of the gorge, the UFO Center or UFO Center researchers found a drawing that was to be their most significant discovery. In the upper part of one of the three vertical plates, stacked up as steps, they saw a petroglyph of the anthropomorphous being. It was truly an unusual being. Its head was huge, somewhat flattened, and resembled a helmet. Two sprouts growing out of the helmet resembled antennae. The researchers clearly saw a nose and gigantic eyes inside the helmet. Could those eyes actually be protective eyewear? The body was short and powerful, its arms thick, its legs very strong. Another figure was depicted to the left of the strange being. It was obviously humanoid, most likely an earthling female. This female was half the size of the helmeted being. Azadov calculated that if an average female is approximately 165 centimeters tall, then the being next to her must have been 3.5 meters tall. In the left portion of the plate, they saw a strange, dubiously technological, triangular structure. Actually, I should say obviously technological triangular structure. It wasn't dubious. There was a line extended from it toward the spacesuit of the helmeted being. Yet another anthropomorphous figure was depicted in the lower right corner of the plate. That too was a humanoid being. He was tall and its torso powerful, but it had no head. Instead, in the very spot where it was supposed to have a head, one could see small protuberance, and from it something like a mustache bent upwards. That is how the Soviet observers described aliens in the famous Vologda case of June 6, 1988, by the way. The petroglyphs were of considerable age too. By the way, the expedition also discovered an ancient metallurgic furnace, an exact copy of the one that they found in the area of the Arkar well. The photographs taken by UFO Center expedition are with the wife of the late photographer, as I mentioned, and those photographs are striking. And in the conclusion, during the course of the expedition, its participants had traversed over 3,000 kilometers of Central Asia, deserts, mountains, and wilderness. Because the territory of Uzbekistan is a peculiar combination of plain and mountain relief. They had researched 6 archaeological sites of Kemen throughout the KYZYL-KUM. 2 of them, one in Altintau, the other in Zarafshan, had not even been described by archaeologists at the time of the expedition. Altintau is a large mountain height in the southwest part of KYZYL-KUM desert. The Zarafshan River Valley occupies a key place on the trade routes of Central Asia. The expedition studied almost 6,000 petroglyphs. rock carvings made by ancient peoples. They depicted images that were characteristic for the age when the petroglyphs were created. After careful research, members of the expedition had concluded that 20 petroglyphs could not be identified, and the images depicted could be interpreted in a number of ways. Some petroglyphs depicted strange technological structures and flying apparatuses, and some depicted very similar to a modern human being technological entities. There were petroglyphs that depicted humanoid beings in costumes that resembled modern spacesuits. Not one of such petroglyphs was ever described in the archaeological literature about the Bukantau. Sergei Zadov thought that such petroglyphs escape description by archaeologists because it is nearly impossible to stereotype them or find analogous images for comparisons, and also due to the fact that some petroglyphs were located in the very unusual and extremely hard to reach places. Most of such petroglyphs are dated to the 4th or 2nd centuries BC. Some of the petroglyphs discovered in the KYZYL-KUM, the laurel reaches of the Amudarya and the KYZYL-KUM desert from the plains of the southwest and northwest area of the country. They resemble those ancient petroglyphs, figurines, and frescoes discovered in Japan, Italy, Valcarmonica, or the Saharan desert, Tassili, Mexico, Palenque, in the Armenian mountains, and other corners of the world. A primitive man, according to Mr. Azadov, did not possess the fancy and inventiveness of the modern man. One need only look at the primitive carvings of animals and humans. Most likely the primitive man depicted only what he or she truly observed. What would he need to see to carve a painting of an object that resembled a flying apparatus with thrusts, or a being dressed in a spacesuit? If not all, at least some of such petroglyphs can be viewed as a serious evidence that at the dawn of time, primitive people inhabiting the territory of modern Uzbekistan had observed objects that we today call UFOs, their landings and takeoffs. Perhaps there was even contact between the humans and those who piloted the craft. It is possible that the aliens were also influencing human civilization. Sergei Azadov mentioned an ancient manuscript carved in stone and discovered in the desert of the KYZYL-KUM that confirms this hypothesis. He hoped that the future expeditions would discover further proof of the ancient astronauts' hypothesis. And I'm sure once the archaeologists have more funds and more missions go, expeditions to the desert, more will be discovered. Now, I have more information about UFOs of Uzbekistan, which I've collected through the years. I have a special interest in Central Asia because of my personal reasons and because of the great interest that area is going to present to the world as more discoveries are made. And I'll be talking more about other aspects. But I do want to tell you more about UFOs of Uzbekistan. Vadim Chernobrov, whom I mentioned a lot, the Russian UFO researcher, scientist, and author, investigated the so-called Belgian triangles of 1990 phenomenon in his country, at the time the USSR. And he had a database of interesting cases from Uzbekistan as well. For example, in November of 1990, while driving on the Navoy-Zarafshan road, 3 people had observed at night a long cylindrical object in the sky. It was at the altitude of about 40 meters. A clearly defined cone-shaped, powerful and focused light was emitted by an unknown source. That's what they saw. And in August of 1990, in the area of Khwarezm, there were reports of a landing of triangular UFO and alleged contacts with locals. We will go into Khwarezm a little bit later. In the summer of 1990, there were reports of pyramid-shaped winged objects that chased local children. Chernobrov is of the opinion that the two observations are of the same object, but if so, they are separated by time and long distances. Actually, we may be dealing with mass sightings. Also, in 2003, Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda published a series of articles about the KGB and UFO phenomenon. The information about the so-called blue file that they had revealed, I've covered it in my books and the books co-authored with Philip Mental quite extensively. And for those who have not read about the so-called blue file, I highly suggest that you look at some of the cases that were reported to the KGB. What is of great interest to me is the response from the readers of the newspaper. One of them had direct connection to Uzbekistan. The author of the letter to Komsomolskaya Pravda, his name is Mikhail, mentioned that he spent 10 years in Nukus, the city close to the Aral Sea. In that city, he and his friends observed glowing objects, usually at night. The military unit was top secret, and they had to report their observations to the local KGB. Mikhail recalled that once there was an order from the Defense Ministry of the USSR regarding measures to take when the unknown objects are detected. I believe I mentioned the instrukция or the instruction before as part of the Setka program in my presentations, so I will not do it here. But those who are interested, they can look at my previous videos. Mikhail recalled two cases when he personally observed UFOs from the airplane he was in. Once during the flight from Nukus to Tashkent, aboard Tu-154 late night, around midnight, he saw a bright dot, and at first Mikhail thought it was Venus. The dot ascended and descended to the right from the airplane, to the right side from the airplane. All other stars in the sky remained motionless. He awoke his neighbor, and they were both amazed. They thought that perhaps another airplane was flying on parallel course. But when their airplane started descending, the bright dot dimmed and also descended. Finally, it remained far behind. The second observation was over the Aral Sea. 40 minutes before the landing, Mikhail observed bright orange spheres in the clouds. The altitude was 10,500 meters. At first, he supposed that they were flying over populated areas and the lights below illuminated the clouds. But this was during the summer, so this could not be. Mikhail added that people like him who consider UFOs not to be an invention of journalists, but a serious challenge to modern science, were grateful to Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper because of its coverage of the subject KGB and UFOs. I also have to give applause to the newspaper for its continuous coverage of UFOs in Russia, because I found leads and confirmation of my research in such areas as the Russian Far East and UFOs. Vladimir Logovsky, a Russian journalist I have been in touch with since early 1990s regarding Soviet UFOs, he's with Komsomolskaya Pravda, science section. Strange objects have been observed in Uzbekistan, and we should find out more about them, quite more. But also objects have been discovered in Uzbekistan that we should know about. Sometimes they disappear too. This is the story of the Sphinx, and I've had it for a long time, and I'm very much interested in it. Kara-Kalpakstan is an autonomous republic. It's about 37% of Uzbekistan, and it has some areas of the ancient Khwarezm. Khwarezm Khanat, or state of Khwarezm, was a famous and powerful state in the 4th century Common Era, or 4th century AD. The city and state reached its peak in the 10th century AD. It was referred to as Egypt of Central Asia. It was a country with a strong army, a trade and scientific center, and it gave the world what we know today as algebra. Scientists of ancient Khwarezm played key role in the development of the exact sciences. Long before the Great Silk Road emerged, the ancient Khwarezm had links with Europe and the Orient, with Siberia and civilizations in the south. It was a cradle of three civilizations that formed in Uzbekistan. There are over 1,000 archaeological monuments in Khwarezm. Many of them are quite unique cultural shrines. Herodotus called this land a country of 1,100 cities. Vakruk Sveta was a popular Soviet magazine, and it had a very interesting article in the issue 4 in the year of 1967. Two scientists from the Karakalpak State Museum published a brief report about the most unusual discovery. The Sultanu-Wise-Dug Mountains, they are considered to be sacred by local population, are located about 80 kilometers from Nukus. Nukus is basically the standard Stalinist-style city in the middle of the desert, in the delta of the Amudarya River. In the 1960s, a Soviet construction crew worked in the mountains installing electrical lines. That day, their bulldozer chewed into the rocky soil with great difficulty because it was overcoming numerous geological obstacles. A grinding sound put sudden end to the operation. A marble plate, almost completely covered by debris, was lying under the bulldozer's blade. The driver stepped down and carefully used his glove to wipe off the dirt. Cold marble eyes of a strange creature stared at his face. Next to the plate, he found another identical head, cut off by the bulldozer from the plate. The strange head possessed steep, bent-down horns. The two-headed Sphinx was carefully removed from the ground. Years have gone by, but no one was ever able to determine the origins of the mysterious Sphinx. No one ever found why the Sphinx was buried in the ground. Was it some strange ritual to bury such sphinxes in the ground, or was the Sphinx hidden from enemies of its owners or worshippers? No matter how much I researched, I was not able to determine where the Sphinx was taken to and where it is kept now. I would love to know. It's a very interesting find. But you know what? The story of the pyramids in Uzbekistan is even stranger. As I said, Uzbekistan is a land of ancient mysteries and fabulous discoveries. Ancient and complex history of this land goes back thousands of years. And there are interesting finds. In the summer of 2002, Russian and Uzbek archaeologists allegedly discovered a series of ancient pyramids in remote mountain gorges in the south of the country, Kashkadarya and Samarkand regions of Uzbekistan. We should remember that from the age of Alexander the Great to the Mongol conquest of this part of the world, it was a most important center of commerce, more important than Europe, and definitely of knowledge, because Europe was in the Dark Ages, if you can not time-wise, but to the extent what they knew and what was known in Central Asia. The hidden structures were described to be 15 meters high and believed to be about 2,700 years old. Archaeologists claim that they are similar to Egyptian pyramids, but their faces are flat instead of stepped. Japanese and Australian scientists are also very much involved in the archaeological excavation in Uzbekistan, but from what I understand, they were not involved in this alleged finding. Because no matter how much I looked, I couldn't find any more reports about the pyramids after 2002 publication in Russia and in some other countries. So I'm trying to find out, was this a hoax? But for what purpose? And if not a hoax, where are the pyramids then? And why has there been no more news about them? Is somebody hiding this information? I do not know. But let's go back to Khwarezm and its mysterious ruins. Khwarezm has such fascinating sites as Toprak Kala, a palace believed by ancients to house the axis of the world. The palace of Toprak Kala, which was assembled about an enclosure located on an elevated platform, ascended to a height of 3 stories and was overlooked by 3 tremendous towers. The palace possessed 3 huge halls. There are statues of soldiers in the Hall of Warriors, and in the Hall of the Kings stand sculptures of the ancient kings, made from the unfired clay. One block of the city was occupied by temple construction built throughout the period of the city's existence. The whole structure is made out of clay bricks. But there is another quite unusual structure in KYZYL-KUM. The remnants of KYZYL-Kala, called Pearl of the Red Desert, are unique. The fortress was discovered by archaeologists of the Khwarezm expedition in 1938. There is some relationship between the KYZYL-Kala and Toprak Kala, which is 30 kilometers to the northwest. KYZYL-Kala is very unusual for ancient constructions and unprecedented in Khwarezm. It is a powerful citadel with the remains of a round protective wall. Outside, protective constructions formed a perfect circle with the cylindrical citadel in the center. It was surrounded by an exterior fortification with towers. The space between the central building and the wall, named the ring, appeared completely built up. The clay construction was enormous. The diameter of the central building was 44 meters, and the height in the best remaining part was about 8 meters, and the diameter of the whole construction about 90 meters. It is possible that the fortress contained an astronomical observatory. It is believed that the KYZYL-Kala was constructed in the 4th or 3rd centuries BC. Some of the halls contain Zoroastrian writings. By the way, those who know my research remember my writings about Archaim in the South Urals, a very identical ancient structure created by unknown people who left it inexplicably. And now a few words about the 1930s archaeological expedition. It was a famous and well-known expedition at the time. The discovery of ancient Khwarezm was compared to Schliemann's discovery of Troy and Carter's excavation in Egypt. Actually, it was one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. It was led by a man whose last name was Tolstov, Soviet scientist, and together with the members of the Khwarezm archaeological expedition, he was able to unearth an entire lost ancient land, documented before only from fragmentary Chinese, Greek, and Persian writings. The expedition used camels, trucks, and small airplanes in its quest to find the lost ruins in the sands of Karakalpakstan. They also found forgotten treasures of ancient Bactria, which straddles the Uzbek-Afghan borderland, and Sogdiana, left behind by the passing legions of Alexander the Great in the 3rd century BC. That's important to me and my own personal unique research of the most unusual connection between the Minoan Greek civilization and the ancient civilizations of Central Asia. I'm not ready to discuss it as yet, but I will. Now, a small footnote. Zoroastrianism started in 1400 BC by Zoroaster, a hermit who lived in the mountains of northern Iran. Zoroastrianism became the state religion of various Persian empires by 7th century BC. They were called fire worshippers. Arabs invaded Khwarezm in 1712 AD and held it for some time. Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and Muslims have lived in Uzbekistan for ages. The Mongol invasion of Khwarezm and Central Asia lasted until the middle of the 14th century. It brought terrible destruction and bloodshed to the cities of Central Asia. Whole civilizations were gone. It took a very long time for the people in the area to recover, but some never did, and their remnants lie under the sands. I am certain that in the future, international and local archaeologists will discover many more fascinating objects in Uzbekistan. Maybe even more sphinxes. Maybe even those pyramids that no one seems to find anymore, 15 years after the announcement. And of course, I'm sure we'll find more signs of the ancient paleocontact or ancient astronaut hypothesis. And as for the Central Asian UFOs, there have been UFO sightings in Usturt, a desert plateau in Central Asia between the Caspian and Aral Seas. It occupies the southern part of Kazakhstan and the northern part of the Karakalpak Autonomous Republic and also Turkmenistan. Usturt, in particular, and the Aral Sea ecological disaster area in general, are very scantily researched territories. I've mentioned before in my lectures that plateau has Nazca-like geoglyphs, mysterious lines and drawings reported by Soviet pilots who were flying over Usturt, and yet there has not been any serious endeavor to study the geoglyphs. But I will describe that area and the official Soviet Setka program expeditions to Usturt in my future videos. Central Asia has a lot to show the world in terms of UFO phenomenon and ancient aliens hypothesis. So stay tuned and thank you.